Guys, we're gonna go live in 1 minute, so please keep quiet, okay? Can you all hear it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
This is Tara. I can hear you. I don't see anyone else. I just
No,
called
me
in,
neither.
so apologies if I missed.
You will see everyone in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
I can see you, Ayah, on screen.
Ready to go?
Yeah, I think we are. Chat says so. Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome you to Building Hardware in a Digital World, the panel we're having today hosted by URBAN-X, the mini-backed startup accelerator in New York City. I am your moderator. My name is Ayah Bdeir, and I'll be hosting a great panel of hardware experts and makers that are going to talk to us about how they navigate the virtual world when they're building hardware. So a little bit about this program first. Building Hardware in a Digital World is a three-part series hosted by URBAN-X, as I said, in partnership with Newlab. And the focus of the series is really how early stage startups are navigating this very interesting time ever since the pandemic, where all of us went remote. But of course, making hardware is a very physical, in-person, hands-on activity. Today, we're talking about shaping the future of connected hardware. This is the second episode in the three-part series, and we're specifically going to talk about making prototypes and really navigating different tools that are available to us and to the different panelists at that time. Quick logistics, please submit your questions via the chat on YouTube and Zoom. We'll be collecting them and we'll do a Q&A towards the end that we can pass along to the panelists. So I'll start by introducing myself, introduce the topic, and then would love to hear from the panelists a bit about themselves, their work, their companies, and then we'll dive into the questions. So my name is Ayah Bdeir. I'm the founder and former CEO of littleBits, a hardware startup based in New York. Since littleBits was a platform of electronic building blocks, I've had the fortune and sometimes the mission of creating hundreds of different hardware products, electronics, plastics, wood, all various things. And so I've experienced all the highs and lows of those activities. And so I don't say it lightly when I say making hardware is not for the faint of heart, and making hardware during a pandemic is really a conversation worth having. I'm also, I was a co-founder of the Open Hardware Summit, a nonprofit summit, and then led to the foundation that supports open source hardware and really allowing more sharing in the open hardware community, and now is supporting millions of different hardware products and companies around the world through the foundation. And we're going to jump in. Well, why don't we jump in with intros first, and then we can talk about the topic. I'd like to call on each one of our panelists to introduce themselves, a bit about what they do and their companies. Let's start with Madison Maxey, the CEO and co-founder of Lumia. Madison, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the panel today. My name is Maddie, and at Lumia, we focus on electronic textiles. So we make very soft, flexible circuits that are meant to integrate well with fabrics of different kinds. A lot of times people think of e-textiles and they think of fashion or clothing, but a lot of the projects we work on are actually in the automotive space or for industrial applications, for projects where a flex PCB or a rigid PCB mechanically won't get the job done. So it's definitely been an interesting experience building during a pandemic and making everything remote, especially because a lot of what we do uses non-traditional electronics techniques. So there's a whole new level of communication to involve in what we do. Just as a little background, my background was originally in design, and I've since studied material science and engineering. So a lot of what we do is kind of a bridge between engineering and design, which I think is a fun place to work. So that's a little bit about me.
Welcome, Madison. Thanks for joining us. All right, next up, I'd love to hear from Tara. Tara Pham, the CEO and co-founder of Numina, who's also an URBAN-X portfolio company.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. We are URBAN-X alumni from the very first cohort. And actually we are also Newlab members. So this event is kind of all in the family for us. So we make at Numina a sensor that mounts to street infrastructure, fixed infrastructure like light poles or buildings. And our sensor measures all different forms of street level activity. So we detect and classify pedestrians, bicyclists, cars, buses, trucks, dogs, bags of trash, all kinds of other things that happen in streets. And from the point of detection, we actually trace each object's path in the street. We do this in a totally anonymous way that then allows us to provide unprecedented behavioral insights to urban planners. And most of our customers are either cities or government adjacent groups or private real estate developers or facilities managers in industrial contexts as well. We designed our hardware and have always, obviously in our own office, and have always manufactured very locally within a 50-mile radius of our office with a contract manufacturer. So I'll be sharing some of that experience today.
Welcome, Tara. Thanks for joining us. And finally, we have Philemon Schofer, the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Hubs, formerly 3D Hubs.
Yeah, thanks. So Philemon Schofer, I'm Dutch. I'm calling in from Amsterdam. So Hubs, formerly 3D Hubs, is an online manufacturing service for custom parts. So basically, you give us your CAD file, your specs, and we'll do the sourcing and the manufacturing for you. Anywhere from prototyping to what we call low volume production. We offer 3D printing, CNC machining, injection molding, and sheet metal services mostly. We have some other technologies, but I guess this is the gist of it. Yeah, so we're not ourselves a hardware company, but we are in hardware. So I think many of the problems you guys are familiar with is the problems we try to solve for our customers. So hopefully we can add some perspective there. Yeah.
Welcome, Philemon. Thank you for joining us. I'm really quite excited about this panel because we have a very varied set of experiences. We have manufacturing hyper locally, we have manufacturing domestically, we have manufacturing overseas. Philemon, obviously, Hubs is a platform that works with manufacturers around the world, so also has seen a plethora of challenges that small on big companies have had during this time. And of course, Numina has the experience of working with cities, which were really transformed during the pandemic, as well as Madison. Your work depends so highly on doing R&D with companies, which of course a lot of that was appended during the pandemic. And so I think the ask of me today was to have a discussion on what we've learned, what are the new tools that we are able to take from remote work, but also use them going forward, not only during a pandemic, but during regular life. And so the preface to this is, obviously making prototypes is invaluable for startups that make physical products. It's a key part of reaching product market fit. Usually requires access to a central workplace and a set of specialized tools. As we all continue to shift to remote work, this is our opportunity to discuss distributed prototyping and also best practices around using digital and physical tools to create these hardware solutions. Many of these prototyping techniques have really matured significantly over the past few years. And so we're going to gauge how far prototypes can go from bench testing to consumer sales. All right, so let's jump in. Again, reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat in Zoom or in YouTube, and we'll tackle them towards the end of the panel. I guess I'd like to start with a question. This will be very conversational, so feel free to interrupt each other and jump in where you see it interesting rather than kind of sequentially. But I guess my first question is, how have you dealt with the shift to remote work when it comes to manufacturing your products? I think this is probably extra significant for Madison and Tara. And then I'd love to hear more about Philemon's perspective on how you've done it with other companies as well. Tara, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Yeah, so we work with a contract manufacturer. It was actually quite easy for us to go remote fairly quickly in the pandemic last year. And part of that was we started with a fairly flexible work from home policy to begin with. And I think that's actually historically been a tool that we've used to also diversify our team. We have had parents and folks with different at-home circumstances that really enjoyed being able to work from home on days that it made sense. So when the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, we already kind of had the systems in place to do a lot of virtual communication and so on. We actually did go completely remote first as a company, and that has been interesting for us in order to grow our team and recruit folks that we might not have found otherwise, although most of our team still is actually based in New York City. With our product itself and working with our contract manufacturer, I think one of the things that we really learned was compassion, just being able to understand that working conditions on the ground and at the manufacturer were changing, and we needed to be flexible to new schedules, different shifts, and when we were visiting our manufacturer in person, being very careful about guidelines, wearing masks, all of that, and respecting that when things had to slow down, there wasn't necessarily a lot that we could do about that, and just communicating that as quickly as we could to customers. We have been pretty lucky in that usually our customers have a pretty high lead time tolerance from the point they place a PO to getting the sensors. And I think in this case, that was especially true just because even though for us, the pandemic created a lot of new use cases and a lot more urgency for our product, there was also this new element of they couldn't just send out installers to install our sensors kind of at will and on demand. There was a lot more planning with that process as well. So just making sure there was clear communication kind of up and down the chain from us, from manufacturing all the way through to fulfillment and onboarding with the customer.
That's a really interesting thing that you talk about compassion as situations change a lot. It's really important that the manufacturers, the company, the clients become really partners in figuring out how to navigate difficult situations. And hopefully these are lessons that companies will carry through after this phase ends and continues to be best practice. Madison, your product is very... Obviously, you're making electronics for textiles. It's very sort of touch dependent. You're doing a lot of R&D that requires prototyping and fast iterations. How did you deal with the shift to remote work? And what do you think you learned that you will keep with you after in the future?
Yeah, I think that you touched on all of the things that were very hard for us because all of our, kind of the way that we're set up is that we do small run production for customers, largely coming out of our office. And then we have a manufacturing partner for larger runs, but our business really depends on being able to make things for people. And so, when the pandemic came and we weren't able to use our office, we had to shift around so that we could get access still to the tools that we use. And, I think one of the biggest things that we learned from the pandemic was kind of what our stack is almost for our customer development, where now we have a set of tools that can kind of live anywhere, like in an apartment or in an office, so that we can get work done. Because we had the circumstance, we were using a laser cutter with, a 18 by 20 inch bed for most of our projects. And suddenly when nobody could go into the office, you can't use it anymore. And there's no way you can bring that home. So we really had to work around to find tools that were, going to be flexible and easy to install anywhere so we could keep doing our work from any location. And I guess the silver lining is that it makes things... Yeah?
Did you essentially move to smaller scale tools or cheaper tools and create a toolkit for every employee or every person that was working on the product?
That's it. That was what we had to do. So we kind of switched from larger bed laser cutters to glow forges because people can have those in their spaces rather than a larger tool. And so that really, it forced us to redefine our capabilities for projects, which has been good because it's good to have parameters. Before we were kind of like the sky's the limit, but it was definitely a challenge.
I imagine that since that requires people giving up some space in their home for these tools, that might be something that is needs some thinking before adopting permanently in the future. Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a permanent fix. I wouldn't say it's a permanent fix by any means. Luckily, we're back in our office, so we can have all of our tools and everything there. But I think that it definitely does make you think about the difference between a business model like ours and a business model like Numina's, where you have one product that you can kind of manage remotely, versus everything we do is customized, so you can't manage it remotely, and that's where the challenge comes in. So it's definitely a work in progress, I think, still, in terms of, if there was a future pandemic, I feel like we would still be in a tough situation. It's not like we've totally solved the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Philemon, you obviously, your whole business provides and relies on managing designs and manufacturing remotely. You have factories that you work with all over the world and customers that you work with all over the world. What did you see as trends, and what did you do to have to adapt, and what will you continue doing going forward, sort of on a permanent basis?
Yeah, no, for us, it's interesting. So from a people perspective in our company, it was very different. Like you said, we built software in the end. So I think many of the challenges you face, we didn't have to face. We did see normally one of the advantages for using us or a network would be the fact that we can always source parts anywhere. We can move locations where needed. We can shift around. We're quite flexible. But we also found with a pandemic at this size and this impact, even that became hard for us. So for in the US, local shops would close, and the ones that wouldn't close would be so tight on capacity, it was very hard to source with them, even being a network with several dozens of US suppliers. So we were also forced overseas, but then there we had a lot of trouble with global logistics. And so the macroeconomics has not been favorable for overseas sourcing. So yeah, we shifted a lot around, and I think for us, what has really changed is that pre-pandemic we've always been distributed, yet heavily dependent on several regions that were just a better fit or easier fit maybe for our platform, and that's something we'll distribute further. So we want to decrease our dependencies from our top supplier regions further. Yeah. To become more.
So actually, you touched on a question I was going to ask about, which is, one of the big things that happened and actually continues to happen is supply chains globally are disrupted, and there are delays in manufacturing processes and supply chains all over the world. Some parts are out of production. Some of them are very delayed. Obviously, it causes a lot of delays in production. And Hubs is one of your value props is to do sourcing for customers. So, so is that something, are there new techniques other than, like you said, diversifying and making fewer focused areas? Are there other techniques that you're going to carry on going forward?
Well, so one thing we think we know, I think that's the correct thing, the correct way of putting it, is that the parts and suppliers and parts are you need to do matchmaking basically, and we see that different regions are good for certain parts, right? So there's a limit to how much you can diversify, because some parts are just better sourced at place A basically. But for us, I mean, we've always believed manufacturing to go local as a long-term trend through automation and the reduction of the labor component. The fact that global logistics and the sustainability aspect of it is not sustainable long-term. But we do think this has accelerated it and put a lot of pressure on the local capacity market. So we'll definitely double down on more local capacity, for example. We see that's just needed at this point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So to think about, zooming out a bit, obviously manufacturing is one piece of the entire process of making hardware. The cycle of taking something from prototype to large-scale production has many different phases. And it would be great to hear from you, since you all have such different sort of perspectives. What is one vital lesson that you could share with other founders that are venturing into making physical product? What is one lesson that you could share with them about how to get your product from prototype to production? I guess we'll start with Madison.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, in terms of getting things to production, we got we got quite lucky around a manufacturing partner who wanted to work with us, through the customizations that we do for each customer, and was really willing to take on our techniques and tool up for the things that they would need to do that. So I think, especially for a business like ours where we're not making a standard electronic component, that partnership is key. I think for most companies, it's not really feasible to plan to build your own factory. In some cases, you can raise the money to do it, but I think finding a great partner who is ready to, who has some skin in the game even to help you produce and get your product to scale is the way I would do it if I needed to do it again.
Tara, what's your lesson that you would impart on other founders embarking on this process?
A couple things. I thought it was funny that Madison said that you felt lucky you found your partner because your manufacturing partner, because I feel the same. And I sort of feel like as a startup, if you don't feel lucky with who you found to do your manufacturing, they're probably not the right fit. There are actually a lot of manufacturers out there who want to work with cool new products and companies and startups and local companies. And so one thing I will say is try to find those partners. Sometimes it's not for the long term. Sometimes the partnership, you kind of learn what you can learn together, and then maybe you learn it's not necessarily the most sustainable relationship. We've actually had that happen with the CM, but they taught us a lot about our own product in the process. I think they actually learned some things about their own facility, and so it was still a very good experience for us. But we've always worked, even when actually we started our company in St. Louis, Missouri, before moving to New York, we also manufactured locally there, and we've also felt, lucky in finding them. So one, I would say find those partners that kind of make you feel lucky you found them. The other thing I would say is, in the same way that we hear it from software companies, I really do think building fast and shipping things and testing things as much as possible is important. Yes, things go at a different speed with hardware, but I will say the first real customer project we did, I guess we would now, looking back, call it a beta, but the first time that we deployed our first manufactured units, we kind of call them our first bake. We broke those units 100 different ways. I really think we found every mode of failure possible, and it gave us a really strong laundry list of things to fix before doing our next production run. And I'm grateful for that, because even though at the moment it felt painful, I think in the long term it saved us a lot of money. And when we came, really into the market at full production after that, we had a product that could withstand literally hurricanes. Our very first sensors we deployed in Florida, and they survived hurricanes. And some of them didn't survive hurricanes, and we learned a lot from that too. So I think testing in the real environments that you will deploy is so important. And it can be hard, depending on what your product is, to get out of the lab, but it's important to do that as soon as you can.
I think what both of you, Madison and Sarah, talk about is extremely, extremely important. The relationship with the manufacturer is a true partnership. They have to feel that way about working with you, and you have to feel that way about working with them. And I think there is an old mentality that you have to pressure the manufacturer, you have to set really impossible deadlines and really be tough on them. But I don't subscribe to that at all, because there is constant problem solving that has to happen, and there has to be the willingness to iterate. So I very much agree with that. I think on the second thing, trying to ship early and trying to put something out, that's, always obviously the software world's mantra. And I think, I don't know if this is what you meant. I think as long as you're communicating that these are prototypes and that these are betas and that you expect that there will be flaws, I think the public or the people that you're sharing it with would understand and accept bugs. And I think some companies have really gotten burnt when they've shipped something and sort of made it look like it was ready for, full production, and really it was a steady state product. And then people realize that there were bugs. They could become quite angry Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Yeah, very important.
Yeah. So Philemon, I think this aspect is important. You help companies take their products from prototype to production. What are some things that you wish companies did more of? One thing I thought about documentation. I'd love you to talk about documentation a bit, but also what are is that true? And if so, what other things would you like companies to do better when they work with you so that you can help them?
Yeah, I mean, this is for us a very interesting topic. Also, hearing you all speak on like the relation with the supplier, because that's of course something that we cannot offer, at least not in the current setup we have. So we ask ourselves every day, like, at what point do we need to advise the customer, or at what point is it best for the customer not to use a platform anymore, right? So a platform has many advantages. It's accessibility, easy to use, super competitively priced, fast. And so we see a lot of our customers use us for prototyping without thinking twice, and we turn those around quick, and that's all good. And then as they scale, you reach a point where the relation with the supplier might outweigh the benefits that a platform has, right? And we're constantly trying to add value to the platform to push that limit upwards, right? That's in our interest, and that's what we believe the future should be, which commoditizing it more and more. I think our biggest challenge there has been the nuance between quality and consistency, right? So that multiple suppliers can give parts within spec, yet they're not the same, right? And I think that's for us a big challenge. Like, and a lot of it depends on the part and the needs of the customer here. But we're now experimenting with setups where we allow to route to same suppliers again, but then advantages like access capacity, which you can access and get a lower price, they are no longer valid, right? But then we automate and we take the risk of the transaction. So we try to add some other values there. But it is a question, like, at what point do you just go to the supplier to build that relation because you want to go over and over to the million of parts with those suppliers? Yeah, at that point, maybe a platform is no longer needed. So that's what we're constantly searching for, and we're trying to bridge that gap. And I would say currently the limit of what we see on our platform, typically, I mean, there's edge cases of more parts. I would say it's up to 10,000 parts roughly, so the low volume range. And the typical buyer journey, I'll use a bit of marketing mantra here, is simply because they can't make it anywhere else or can't make it anywhere else competitively for a good price. And then the network still has a real added value.
What documentation do you require, Philemon? I think that's an important piece of it, because if they're going to move away from, they're going to work with you up until 10,000 parts, and then from 10,000 parts are going to move away to find their own supplier or contract manufacturer. They have to sort of take a package with them to get that done. What should they be supplying you, and what will you in turn supply them from the process, and what's kind of what's been updated through manufacturing the parts?
Yeah, so I mean, currently we don't require a lot. I mean, just standard CAD drawings and technical drawings if needed, if there's special stuff that needs to be called out. We do offer all sorts of certifications, like REACH, certificate of conformance, all these things. But those are more for the customers themselves, I guess. So I mean, in the end, and of course, if there's complex technical drawings, we'll talk and engage with the customer to understand the details, because it's not always easy to interpret. But that's also part of the automation we're trying to build, to read and understand certain parts of the technical drawings, which we then, for example, we anonymize those before we send those to the supplier. These kind of things to sort of make it safe also for the customer to provide those kind of details. But at this point we don't. I'm not sure if that's what you're hinting towards. Like, we don't sort of ask suppliers to feedback manufacturing experiences for later use, for example. That's not something we do yet. But it is something we're looking at. For example, to save the CAM file of the actual machine and possibly give that back to the client for future use. But also, if we want to scale up volume with the client on our platform, we can then offer the same CAM to the supplier, and therefore have their services become more efficient, and therefore provide a better price to the customer. Yeah.
I think it becomes extra relevant when a company or a product has to go through a lot of DFM, design for manufacture. There's a lot of iteration and a lot of adjustments. Then that process, that feedback loop becomes extra important. But sometimes what you're making is somewhat straightforward and it's sort of almost unidirectional, and it becomes less important in that case.
Yeah. So for us, we do give DFM advice like through the tool. And can adjust the files where needed through our experience with manufacturing. But that's it.
Yeah.
That's it mostly.
So obviously, like I said in the beginning, making physical product is not for the faint of heart. There's time investment, there's money investment, there's long lead times that you commit to, and so it's typically, that's why they say hardware is hard, but at the same time there's something so satisfying about receiving the first prototype or part of a production line that at least I always thought was really cool. But when there's pressure on supply chain, when there's pressure on because of remote work, when there's pressure because of financial reasons or other things, there are many reasons somebody could list to quit making physical product or to try to do it in a simpler way or try to do it differently. I'd love to hear, particularly from Tara and Madison, if you've had moments where you're like, I wish I was making a software product, or we need to simplify our product line, we need to simplify our offering, we need to make things differently, we need to make something less dependent on the physical world. Have you had those kind of questions haunting you, because of this period, but also going forward? Tara, you're shaking your head, so I don't. It sounds like you've had some of those questions. So I'd love to hear from you first.
I like these questions. They're funny questions. Because we work a lot with governments. I would say because we work with governments, sometimes I have more questions about like, are we selling to the right customer? I will say for us, we are highly differentiated in our commitment to privacy. So everything about our product is privacy by design, meaning that even though we make a product that collects data about public spaces and the public realm, we're never intentionally collecting personally identifiable information. At every layer of our stack, we are removing potentially personally identifiable information, and we display data in a way that aggregates information and would make it further difficult for people to try to re-identify the data. I bring this up because a big part of our product is that our hardware is standalone and it minimizes data collection at the source. So raw data coming in, which in our case is camera data, imagery, we're processing on the device and then discarding. We don't save pictures of the street or of people's faces or anything like that. And for that reason, our hardware is actually very necessary. So I think maybe the thing I would point current and potential hardware founders to is making sure that you know why you're making hardware specifically, really defining what your product's purpose is and your company's mission is, and why is the hardware critical to that. I know for us, like, we will always have a hardware component because our goal is to prevent additional surveillance, and the only way we can really do that is if our device essentially strips away over data collection or excessive data collection at the edge or at the source. And so for us, that's actually as much philosophical as anything else, as a technical product requirement or anything else. And so I would encourage hardware founders to think about that, like, what is really the critical mission of your hardware? And if that is strong, you might ask, like, oh, why did I do this to myself? It's so difficult, but hopefully you won't be asking questions like, is there another way we could do this or should have done this? Hopefully you're investing your time in a hardware product that can really kind of be valuable for a long time.
So just to make sure I understand correctly, because you're not saving all the images and sort of sending them through the cloud, they are actually stored on the physical devices themselves in their local areas. Is that correct?
So they're processed on the device, and then after they're processed, they're discarded. So a minute later, that image is not anywhere. It's been deleted. And that is different from, an alternative that some of our customers might be considering is, for example, a traffic camera that's just streaming video back to a central office or server somewhere. And then they have lots of video data about streets, lots of pictures of people's faces and license plates, and lots of potentially personally identifiable information that's actually a huge liability for them and all of their stakeholders. And in our case, our hardware is a critical piece to stripping all of that away at the edge or at the source.
So it becomes for you extra important that you know exactly what kind of insights you're trying to from cities at that time, because you're not going to be able to do post analysis afterwards.
That is right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And Madison, asking the question to you, how has digital manufacturing, rapid prototyping on one hand, and how there have been a lot of innovations on that front, but also the sort of disruption that we've gone through and probably will continue to go through to some extent, how has it changed the way you think about making products? Have you had those existential thoughts with your team?
The existential thoughts, that's a good question, because it's definitely, if you need to order a round of circuit boards, that's going to be like, a few $1,000s every single time that you need to order it. And, of course, I feel like anyone thinks if I was doing software, that money just goes in our pocket or in our bank account, just like these expenses just don't exist in software or even for certain service businesses. So it definitely can be, it's very expensive, it's time consuming, but something that I always find to be really rewarding about working in the physical realm is that people have like such a visceral reaction to it in a way that you can't get from software. When we send someone a sample of their material heating, there's such an intuitive response to it that I think only something in the physical world can really accomplish. So, I think if I ever started a new business, it'd probably be software, like the simplest, like a to-do app business or something that's just like so simple. That's at least what I tell myself. But I do like love working in the physical space, and I feel like it's worth, like if you're somebody who wants that tactility, I feel like a lot of my own motivations come from really loving design, really loving engineering, like wanting to build physical things. So having that as part of our work is worth so much of the pain, at least for now. But I think that's a great question, because it's totally true that it's a hard thing to work on.
Yeah, it's I say it because I personally feel it, and I think the more we learn through psychology and through various research about the mind-body connection, the more we learn about how memories are created often from imagery or from objects or from tactile feelings and the feedback that our bodies get from them, the more we understand why physical products are so visceral and why it's so important to be able to give somebody a gift or find something that you haven't seen in a long time and touch it, or smell something. And I think I find these experiences to be priceless, and they become kind of the counter to some of the challenges that you live through. So, all right. So we have a number of questions from our audience. Some of them are for specific panelists, and some of them are for multiple for the whole panel. I'll just read them through and then kind of feel free to bounce around if others have input. So for Philemon from Daipan Lee, do you exclusively prototype with your manufacturing partners? If not, can you name your favorite prototyping services for component prototyping, board spins, small batch turnkey, etc., in addition to hubs?
We only use our network. Yeah. So I know the competitive landscape a bit, of course, but I don't use any other services myself, if that's the question. Sorry, I'm reading the question as well now. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, I pasted too many things at once. I think it's impossible to read what I wrote. I'll read the question again. Do you exclusively prototype with your manufacturing partners? Meaning, do you have an exclusive relationship with them? And if not, do you have favorite prototyping services for components or board spins or small batch turnkey? I think Daipan Lee is looking for some recommendations.
Yeah. No, I would definitely say try hubs.com, and we'll get you your prototypes. Yeah.
Any other, maybe friends or competitors that you point to? I mean, I know it's not typical to ask that question, but at the same time, this is an industry that frequently works together. Are there any others?
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. It depends very much on the part, right? So the services I know outside of ourselves are typically the specialized services, right? Also for stuff that we don't do. Would I have a recommendation? Not really, frankly.
The 3D printing marketplace based in New York. I forget now what it's called. Why can't I remember? Oh my God, this is really bad. Anyway, I'm seeing suggestions. These Protolabs.
Prolabs
could be one.
Prolabs, yeah.
Shapeways. That's what I was trying to remember. Yeah.
Shapeways. Yeah, 3D printing. Yeah, those are good ones actually. I think Voodoo no longer exists. I believe, or do they still? Shapeways is good for 3D printing for sure. Prolabs is actually the owner of Hubs now. They bought Hubs earlier this year. So I would categorize them as a bit higher market segment. So they're much faster than we are. So very suitable for prototyping, but it does come at a higher price point. But definitely a good service, yeah.
Next question for Madison and Tara. What's some advice you could give around identifying manufacturers and understanding whether they are a good long-term partner? Meaning, how can you identify whether somebody is going to be a good manufacturing partner? How do you recruit them? How do you interview them? How do you evaluate? Tara, we'll start with you.
So this is actually, I think, a big advantage with manufacturing locally is you can visit their facility, you can meet them in person. Often when you do that, you can see really how they operate. Like, is their facility clean? What kinds of other products are they building? Things that they might not remember to tell you in a phone interview, or sometimes it's things that are confidential that they're not going to share in a emailed or maybe potentially recorded conversation. So being able to go in person is great. I think also, like, when we found our current CM, I think we interviewed several, visited 3 or 4 and got quotes. And part of what stood out to us with who we work with, who we really like, is one, they could do everything very well. And we felt very good about the quality and their processes. They're family owned, and they were able to work with us. We also do kind of just in time or very small batch manufacturing. And we felt confident that they would be able to kind of fit us in between bigger customers' runs, and work on the timelines that we needed. The other thing that I really appreciate about them is they were very transparent about how they were about their quote and how they were pricing their work with us. So these are all things to take in consideration. Payment terms is also big. It really depends on your product and your customer and your lead times and your business model. But for us, having certain payment terms was very, very helpful, and kind of knowing we work with a manufacturer that has some very big customers and has very large lines of credit available to them, but was willing to work with a small company, and we can talk with the leadership, and get on a phone call within the same day on any given day, and we're in the same time zone. Like, all of that really added up to be kind of an easy choice for us.
Madison,
I'd love to
what
hear
are your
Madison. Yeah.
I think a lot of similar things. Our manufacturer has an office in the US, but also in Juarez, Mexico. So the fact that we can go over and visit and see a small production line and talk with their engineers is really useful. I mean, I think another thing sometimes that like new founders don't always consider is that you really have to understand how a manufacturer thinks and what your value is to them as well. I think sometimes, a founder might get really excited and be like, I have this amazing new idea and everyone's going to want to make it for me. And it's like, these manufacturers really make money when they're doing large quantities. So until you're shipping large quantities, you're kind of losing them money, probably. So it's like you need to understand what their strategy is and what their goals are in terms of working with someone who's not going to bring them, a very large unit run for a while, and making sure that that narrative makes sense to you and making sure that you have ways of bringing them value otherwise. I think the relationship works best if you come into it realizing that you're not going to be their most profitable customer. You may never be their most profitable customer. So how is it a good experience every time you speak? Whether that's market insights or whether it's keeping them updated about the growth of the business so they can understand where you're going. I think that's how the relationship stays tight until you can really be a financial benefit to them.
I think those are extremely important insights from Tara and Madison. I think that, really understanding where you live in their business model. Are you in their sweet spot? If you're their biggest customer, it's a problem because it means that, they are not necessarily able to ramp up to where you need them to be. And as you grow, you will start hitting their limits. If you're their smallest customer, it means that, they may prioritize much larger companies or much larger customers at your expense, and becomes a problem. And so you have to really understand what value you bring to them. Your value may be about how difficult the product is and how they're showing their expertise in developing something new. It might be because they want to be in a sector that they're not in. It might be that you're just in their sweet spot and they're betting on your company growing. And I think really kind of spending time listening for those signals is very important. Yeah. Well, I think we're at time. I'm really grateful to all of you for having spent this time with us. I'm very grateful also to URBAN-X for hosting this and a series of these conversations that tend to be very specific about making physical products and understanding cities and understanding manufacturing. More of these conversations help other founders avoid pitfalls, or at least know what to ask. Thank you to Newlab, who's a partner, and Minnie, who's a partner. And stay tuned for more events from URBAN-X, and please stay in touch. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.